Good evening. The planned resignation of Keith Motley as chancellor of UMass Boston tops the news from Dorchester this week. Dr. Motley apparently agreed to step aside last week amid pressure from UMass President Martin Meehan and the university's board. Motley has been a fixture on the campus since 2006 when he took over as interim chancellor. He took the permanent role in 2007, and Motley has been widely credited with the unprecedented growth of UMass Boston, from a 25% jump in student enrollment, several new academic buildings, and the expansion of the campus to include the Bayside section of Columbia Point. It also came with the first ever dormitory on the UMass Boston campus, a 1,000-bed complex for freshmen, which is now under construction. Motley's anticipated departure, prompted mainly by what has been characterized as a budget crisis on the campus, has roiled UMass Boston over the last week. The full scope of the deficit facing UMass Boston remains rather fluid, as projections range from as high as $30 million to as low as $5 or $6 million for this year. Last month, the former president of Bowdoin College, Barry Mills, was installed by President Meehan to join Motley in what was then billed as a supporting role. Meehan's team insisted that Mills would not be there to replace Motley, but instead simply to bring in a new set of managerial skills. Last week, that changed, and it changed abruptly. Motley tendered his resignation last Wednesday evening. It's effective in June, and he will then take a one-year paid sabbatical and return to a teaching position on the UMass Boston campus after the break. Now, Barry Mills will serve as the interim chancellor. The decision, however, has not been well received, at least not on campus, where anger over budget cuts is running high among students and faculty members. There are calls for Motley to stay on and to reverse his resignation. The student representative to the UMass Board of Trustees, a UMass Boston student named Pantea Fatemi Artistani, she spoke out loudly against Motley's departure in a public hearing on the campus this week. The student government, both graduate and undergraduate, have passed resolutions in support of Motley. Local elected officials have also called on that resignation to be rejected. Now, it's not yet clear if any of that will matter. Motley has been portrayed, especially in a series of Boston Globe stories over the last month, as the person most responsible for the campus's current fiscal difficulties. The chancellor himself has stated publicly that he takes ownership for those troubles, along with the many accomplishments of the last decade. But there continue to be calls for him to stay on, so stay tuned to this story. The MBTA continues a series of meetings about the future of the Mattapan high-speed trolley this month. The final meeting is set for Monday, April 24th. That's at the Lower Mills Library at 6:30 p.m. There have already been two meetings, one in Mattapan and one in Milton. The MBTA is bringing mainly good news to the public. They've committed to just under $8 million in investment to keep the 10-car fleet of trolleys running for the near future, perhaps into the next decade. It's not always been guaranteed. These are, after all, trolleys that were built in the 1940s, and while they were very well made by very talented American workers, it is a challenge to find replacement parts for vehicles that were made during the Second World War. At a meeting last week at the Mattapan Library, supporters of the trolley line, which include City Councilor Tim McCarthy and Representative Dan Cullinane, who spoke at the meeting, they encouraged the MBTA to continue to invest in the line. The Boston Planning and Development Authority's board has voted to approve a new 5-story building on Dorchester Avenue this week. The 20-unit apartment complex will go at 1857 to 1859 Dorchester Ave. It'll also house a first-floor retail space. The developer has committed to donate $10,000 to two community organizations. One is the Martin Richard Foundation, which we'll talk more about in a bit. The other, City Youth Sports Training and Education Movement. Now, One Boston Day will be observed in the city on Saturday. It's the 4th anniversary of the bombings that killed 3 and maimed scores of spectators and runners at the Boston Marathon in 2013. In Dorchester, home to the Richard family who lost their son and their brother, Martin Richard, age 8, hundreds of volunteers are expected to spend the day cleaning up sites all over the neighborhood. The Martin Richard Foundation is organizing a huge neighborhood cleanup day with the Ashmont Adams Neighborhood Association. Volunteers will focus on Dorchester Ave around Ashmont Station from 11 a.m. until 2. Additional sites include the Boys and Girls Clubs of Dorchester, Ryan Playground, Savin Hill Beach, and the Mather School, all important places in Martin's life. There will be a moment of silence on Saturday at 2:49 p.m. It'll take place at the Peabody Square Clock, where Martin, Lindsay Liu, Crystal Campbell, Sean Collier, and Dennis Simmons, the Boston police officer, will be remembered. And volunteers can sign up online at teammr8.org to volunteer. Also coming up later on this month, another big cleanup effort and volunteer opportunity. The annual Neponset River cleanup will be on Saturday, April 29th from 9 to noon. Last year, there were over 200 people who went out and collected 6 tons of debris and 140 bags of trash right out of the river and the estuary around it. The focus this year will be Lower Mills and Cedar Grove. You can go to neponset.org to volunteer for that effort. One last thing tonight, 2 Easter egg hunts taking place on Saturday morning in the neighborhood. Dorchester Park welcomes kids and parents to hunt for eggs in the woods right around the tennis courts in Dot Park. That starts at 10 o'clock in the morning. A second Easter egg hunt is at Pope John Paul II Park in Neponset. That one is at 11. And that's the news tonight from Dorchester. I'm Bill Forry of The Reporter. Now back to you, Chris.
Bill, I want to come back to Keith Motley and UMass Boston. Right now, this college is going through its most dramatic transformation in more than 40 years since it moved out there. Talk about what Motley did to make that happen.
Well, Keith Motley, I have to say, he's been a transformational figure. I think I've heard people call him the most important chancellor that the campus has had, and I think it's accurate. Keith Motley took office at a time where there was a lot of resistance to the growth of UMass Boston in Dorchester and in South Boston. A lot of anxiety about a change in the mission of UMass from a commuter, almost like a glorified community college, to what it's become now, which is, I think, undisputedly a well-regarded public research university in the city of Boston. Keith Motley is the man who's most responsible for that transformation, not only through his management of the campus, but through his personality and through his generation of goodwill among community activists and political leaders. He did what his predecessors could not do, including Bill Bulger, the president of UMass back in the early 2000s, which was to get buy-in about that change, which now includes on-campus housing for the first time. Of course, that really upset neighbors when that was first introduced. It was rejected. But Keith Motley, because, in part because he was able to make the case for why this university needed to change in order to survive and to grow. That growth has been difficult, and especially in the last couple of years, as there are huge dirt piles, which Chancellor Motley has alluded to in his public comments, which have come to define the campus now. I think he understands, and many do, that's a temporary situation, and these gleaming new buildings, and very costly new buildings, by the way, will be his legacy.
What about the public research element? I mean, is that just institutional prestige, or is there something more to that?
No, I think it's a coordinated strategy of growth for UMass and for the regional economy. And if you recall, Mayor Walsh and Mayor Menino kind of heralded the growth of UMass and have as a key link in the what they call the Red Line biotech corridor, which is really linking UMass all the way up to Kendall Square and beyond with job growth and incubators of STEM research, new technologies. UMass is very much a part of that, even if it's in an aspirational way at this point. But it is in a functioning way now. There are laboratories in a brand new science complex, which is the first building you now see when you drive onto the campus. These are things that over time I think will make it even more of a player regionally in research and development. But clearly it had to first be built, and it had to be envisioned. And Keith Motley and his team are responsible for that.
Well, regardless, the final word on how well the infrastructure has been managed, talk about Motley doing one thing that his predecessors were not able to do, which was to get a dorm by the community.
Right, and no, it's still controversial to some degree, but there just has not been the hue and cry against it that we saw in 2003, for example. His predecessor, Joe Angora, who had a great deal of difficulty dealing with neighbors and winning over political allies in the city, had to leave UMass Boston because of that issue in particular. Keith Motley, it's not like he made it look easy, but with his, frankly, his warmth, his strength of personality and intellect, was able to, over a series of years, and I think with some very smart strategy, make the case to neighbors who had been skeptical. Not that they all agree, but it has happened, and it's in the ground right now as we speak. It's going up.
Well,
so.
there's still some things that to me are not very clear yet.
Yeah.
And number one, how big a deficit there is, and what does all of these measures addressing that do about the mission in the future?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of concerns right now among faculty and students in particular, the people who matter most on the campus, frankly, about the mission. And they're feeling that austerity measures, budget cuts, and potential fee hikes are all going to make that mission, which at its essence, when UMass was created on the peninsula in Dorchester, was to serve non-traditional students who may not otherwise get a college opportunity. That mission has grown. I think it's morphed over time to include more traditional students. Obviously, a dormitory is a symbol of that. But it's still the case that UMass Boston is the most diverse in terms of ethnicity, country of origin, income level, you name it. So many of these students are first-time college attendees from their families. That's not changed. What has changed, I think, is the reputation of the university is much stronger, and that developed under Motley's watch in particular. And to your point, the deficit, it's still not clear, Chris. Barry Mills, who's now essentially will be acting chancellor in June, says that it could be as much as $30 million next year. That's, I think, without doing anything to stop that growth or to curb extra costs. They're looking for new ways to increase, for example, online enrollment, which they think will bring in millions in new revenue for the campus. They feel like that's an area where Motley underperformed. But there remains, I have to say, deep skepticism in the motivation for removing Keith Motley. Many folks feel that this was for reasons beyond any kind of structural deficit, which the entire UMass system has to grapple with.
I want to ask you about another red line corridor issue, and that's all the transit-oriented housing that we're seeing. Even in Dorchester, you just have that new approval near Ashmont Station, and I guess things are at least taking a few steps forward around Glover's Corner, which is near Savin Hill Station. Yes,
in fact, BPDA, which has launched a new planning initiative in Glover's Corner, which is essentially the intersection of Hancock and Dorchester Avenue and Freeport Street. There's a lot of industrial area around there, as you know, and for example, the city's bus yard, the biggest of the city yellow school bus yards, is there. They're moving ahead with a walk and bike tour, which I believe is April 25th, and it's going to be an opportunity for folks who want to get engaged in that effort to walk and bike that area and see what exactly is there in terms of existing use. But the new TOD units near PDD Square are just one of a number of projects. That's 20 units. There are cumulatively over 100 new units coming online over the next year with projects that are already in the pipeline or are likely to be approved soon. There's a major, the old Ashmont Tire building, which got bulldozed last year. There's a new 6-story building going there called Treadmark. From what we can tell, it's already pretty well booked up for occupancy. There's a strong demand, as you know, for housing in that part of Dorchester, and there's no sign of that slowing down at all.
I want to ask you about one more coming attraction, because I know you mentioned the cleanup along the Neponset River. Yeah. That Greenway extension from Lower Mills to Mattapan Square, that should be opening soon.
It should be. It actually should have opened already, and there's been some disappointment that it's not. I'm told that it will be open this spring, so the clock's ticking on spring, obviously. I have walked it. It's not officially open, but you're able to get access to it. It is a really beautiful new link between Mattapan Square through parts of Milton and to the existing Neponset Greenway, which folks probably have used, that starts at Central Ave and extends into Pope John Paul Park. And beyond into Port Norfolk now, which is also home to a brand new waterfront park. So tons of new amenities for folks to explore now that the weather's finally cooperating again.
And of course, you've got the rest of the bike trail the other direction, upstream all the way to Reedville. So that's
Absolutely.
a good trek.
It's a good trek. This will add just one more mile, but it's a scenic and beautiful and otherwise previously inaccessible mile. So it's going to be a nice addition.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.
Bill Forry from the Dorchester Reporter. We'll have more news in just a moment.